après-midi tout le monde. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, good evening, depending where you are in the country. Alors, bienvenue à cette session plénière qui va être très excitante. And kudos to the CSPC team for their determination and creativity that has allowed us to actually hold the meeting this year in spite of the pandemic. And the pandemic is going to be a subject of our discussion on this panel. Alors, au Canada, comme d'ailleurs partout au monde, la pandémie a mis en évidence des défis importants dans le système de la science, de la recherche, mais surtout du dialogue, de la collaboration entre les scientifiques, les chercheurs, leurs institutions, les agences gouvernementales et le gouvernement en général. Alors, je ne sais pas si on peut se souvenir, je ne crois pas, d'un temps où vraiment les décideurs attendaient avec impatience les résultats de la recherche pour prendre des décisions. Donc, c'est quelque chose d'absolument inédit et ça a permis vraiment de créer des dialogues, de créer des relations qui n'existaient peu ou pas auparavant. Alors, I want to thank everyone, in Canada for their incredible mobilization, the researchers, the scientists, the industry group, and all the help they have provided to myself on various panels and to my colleagues on this panel and to our government in general. So some of you may be in the audience, and on behalf of everyone on this panel, I want to thank you so much for all the help that you have done and you're still doing as well. Well, October 2020 marks the third year of the existence of another organization whose members are with you today on this panel, the Canada Coordinating Research Committee, that was created in 2017, October 2017, in response to one of the recommendations of the Fundamental Science Review, better known as the Naylor Report. And the focus and the objective, the mandate of CRCC, which includes the members that you have on this panel, plus the deputy ministers from Health Canada and from Innovation, Science and Industry Canada as well. So the focus and the mandate is to enhance collaboration, enhance coordination across sectors, across disciplines, and essentially, create a more coherent, more nimble funding system for the researchers, for the young students, researchers alike. And I was privileged actually to witness the birth of the organization and to see it evolve over the years. Of course, the COVID pandemic has put a lot of pressure on all the organization members of the CRCC, and I hope that you have seen, witnessed how they stepped up to the plate, how they have answered the call of the necessity that has been imposed by the pandemic, but you will hear more from each one of them. Alors, la façon qu'on va faire ce panel, c'est que je vais commencer par, c'est à peu près en trois parties, si vous voulez. La première partie, chacun des panélistes va prendre quelques minutes pour faire une petite présentation donc, de leur organisation, des activités qu'ils font depuis quelques mois maintenant. Et la deuxième partie, ça va être des questions que je vais leur poser, donc basées sur ce qu'ils ont dit ou qu'ils n'ont pas dit. Et ensuite, on va avoir amplement de temps pour les questions venant du public. So we'll do this in three parts: introductory remarks by each of the panelists, questions from myself, and then questions from the audience. Please prepare your questions, put them in the chat box. We'll leave plenty of room for questions and hopefully for answers as well. So with this very brief introduction, I'm going to turn it to the first panelist, Dr. Michael Strong, who's the president of the Canadian Institute for Health Research and is presently the chair of CRCC. Over to you, Mike.
Merci, Mona, and bonjour à tous. Thank you for that kind invitation. When we look at the COVID-19 infection and mortality rates across the globe, for now are over 40 million infections, over 1 million deaths with this, we find that Canada's rate is really at the lower end of that spectrum. So while we're certainly not out of the woods yet and must continue to remain vigilant in this fight, we also know that Canada's relative success in containing the virus was certainly no accident. It was a result of sound public policy driven by evidence and supported by the collaborative efforts of federal, provincial, and territorial governments under very difficult circumstances. Les membres du panel ici aujourd'hui méritent toutes nos félicitations pour leur contribution à cette réforme concertée, dans laquelle se sont écrits des appels visant à intervention de recherche rapide pour répondre aux défis posés par le COVID-19, tant au pays qu'à l'étranger. I'm incredibly proud and grateful to my team at CIHR for their efforts to help launch the first rapid response open call on COVID-19 on February the 10th, 11 days after COVID-19 was declared a public health emergency, and a month before WHO officially declared it a pandemic. Since that time, with partners around this table and additional partners, we were able to collectively invest over $180 million through 9 funding opportunities and continuing to expand that in support of the Government of Canada's response to COVID-19. While adjudicating this unprecedented investment was not an easy task, it was a rewarding one. First, because it brought us closer together, both within our individual agencies and across our agencies. We also learned a great deal as a result of these efforts. COVID-19 crystallized the importance of research coordination, knowledge mobilization, open science, the engagement of First Nations, Inuit and Métis people, collaboration with federal and provincial partners and other research funding organizations, as well as the need for proactive investments to strengthen Canada's response to health emergencies. I'm pleased to note that we've now see some early results from the projects that were funded through these rapid response competitions, which are already informing critical issues related to the pandemic in Canada and around the world, and will continue to do so for the years to come. These projects include a broad range of research activities, including clinical interventions, knowledge mobilization, basic fundamental science, as well as research on health communications, countering misinformation. Another important aspect of this collaboration is our ability to provide evidence-based advice to multiple sectors across Canada. This includes contributions to the COVID-19 Immunity Task Force, and 2 CIHR scientific directors, Dr. Ru Kasich and Dr. Carrie Barasa, are leading their respective expertise, are lending their respective expertise on immunity and infection and Indigenous health to this task force. Other avenues include the CAN COVID Network, the COVID-19 Vaccine Clinical Trial Discussion Forum, and close federal and provincial collaborations with agencies, including Public Health Agency of Canada, to inform various aspects of policy development through CIHR's Best Brains exchange programs. These forums continue to be critical components of our national efforts to flatten the curve and suppress future waves of the infection, of which we're clearly in the midst of one as we speak. I should note that Canada has been working closely with international platforms to facilitate global efforts in informing, sharing, research collaborations, knowledge mobilization, for example, the United Nations Research Roadmap for COVID-19 recovery, the World Health Organization, and the Global Research Collaboration for Infectious Disease Preparedness. I would at this time like to acknowledge the fine work of many of my colleagues, including Dr. Stephen Hoffman, the Scientific Director of CIHR's Institute of Population and Public Health, as well as our fellow panelists, Ted Hewitt, President of SSHRC, who are representing Canada at the United Nations. I would also like to acknowledge Dr. Charu Kasich, Scientific Director of the CIHR Institute of Infection and Immunity, who has also attended the WHO meetings and who has just been appointed the chair of GLOPID-R. This is great news for Canada and for the global research community. I've had the good fortune of being able to work with Charu over the past 2 years while I've been at the CIHR. I know that she will be a powerful advocate for science and research in this new role. While the COVID-19 pandemic and resultant lockdown have been difficult for all of us as Canadians, I remain optimistic about the future because of the evidence-based approach that Canada and countries throughout the world are taking in response to this global challenge. Science will help us and will guide us through this, and Canada has exceptional people working in all areas of health research who are directing their expertise to this vital work. Once again, thank you to my colleagues on this panel for their contributions throughout this journey. I look forward to maintaining the spirit of collaboration in the months and years ahead. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Mike. Thank you. And, you know, in addition to the great colleagues that you have mentioned and who have been extremely supportive of our expert panels, I want to mention as well Dr. Christine Chambers, who's the scientific director of the Institute of Youth and Child Health, for her incredible contributions as well, and just so many others. The pandemic, like you mentioned, has, so many disciplines have weighed in to help on the health front. And I'm just like so eager to hear from as well our other colleagues. But maybe I'll start with you, Ted, as president of the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, but importantly, as the inaugural chair of CRCC as well.
Yep, and I have the scars to prove it.
But you survived.
Thank you, Mona, for that kind introduction, but especially for your leadership in guiding Canada's scientific community through these really, really challenging times. Comme vous, j'estime que des démarches novatrices et collaboratives sont essentielles à la production et à la diffusion des nouvelles connaissances qui sont nécessaires aujourd'hui pour comprendre la COVID-19 et la combattre. I also agree that these approaches really have to cut across numerous disciplines, as well as involving partnerships that can amplify the impacts of research on fostering recovery and future resilience. For our part, since the outset of the pandemic, SSHRC has been working hard to support those researchers within the social sciences and humanities community working on COVID-19, and really to put their findings to work with really no vaccine or surefire treatment yet, and I emphasize yet, fingers crossed. The primary tools public health officials and governments really have used in response to the outbreak are really data, behavior, and policy-based. And in that context, social sciences and humanities research is not just a nice to have, not only desirable, but I would argue absolutely essential. La force des chercheurs en sciences humaines réside fréquemment dans le travail qu'ils font avec leurs collègues d'autres disciplines. Avec eux, ils s'efforcent de mieux comprendre les aspects humains de la pandémie et ses impacts, ses effets sur les groupes vulnérables, la respect ou non des consignes et, ce qui est de plus en plus important, ce qu'il faut faire pour reconstruire notre économie et la rendre plus forte. Tout cela est crucial pour la gestion de la maladie et l'élaboration des politiques. For example, SSHRC is funding research into social cohesion and trust in democratic institutions, including people who people trust for information, rather, and why some people believe in conspiracies, and believe it or not, they do. A fascinating study of misinformation has found that when people consume news on social media in their zeal to share that news with others, this interferes with their ability to assess its accuracy, and this is really a troubling result. Marginalized groups we're hearing about a lot also face greater risks. COVID's impacts are diverse. They are unequal depending on who you are and where you are in society. In terms of disease risk, people with a disability or living in poverty are disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. So in supporting this work, we encourage and promote collaboration with researchers, as I said, across disciplines and with a wide range of partners to get new knowledge out into the community and to ensure that strategies for recovery and resilience are inclusive and transformative. So for example, in addition to our regular programming, we collaborated with NSERC and CIHR on specific pandemic-related calls last winter, as you well know. We also launched a partnership engage grants COVID-19 special initiative, providing short-term support for small-scale stakeholder-driven partnerships that enable researchers, graduate students, postdoctoral fellows, and non-academic partners to work together to address urgent and specific needs. Et pour que l'information sur les travaux financés soit publique, le CRSH a conçu en mai dernier un tableau de bord axé sur la riposte à la COVID-19. Il met en évidence les chercheurs que le CRSH finance et dont les travaux portant sur les dimensions humaines de la pandémie ainsi que sur le relèvement et la résilience à long terme. Sure, work with, as well with international partners, not just domestically. We're partnering with countries engaged in the transatlantic platform to develop a COVID-19 focused funding call on recovery, renewal, and resilience. And just this past summer, as Mike had mentioned, I had the great privilege and pleasure of co-chairing an international steering committee on global post-COVID economic response and recovery, which has informed the development of the UN's research roadmap for COVID-19 recovery. And I understand that will be released very soon, and some of us are seeing some early copies. Les initiatives de ce genre seront décisives pour aider le Canada et le monde à se remettre de la pandémie et pour atténuer les effets de ralentissement de l'activité économique. Le CRSH sera là pour soutenir les chercheurs en sciences humaines afin qu'ils puissent collaborer à des activités qui permettront de relever les défis auxquels nous ferons face dans les mois et les années à venir. Merci, Madame.
Merci beaucoup, Ted. Et tu as évidemment parlé de la contribution des sciences sociales et humaines à la pandémie, mais je dois aussi dire que, évidemment, au début de la pandémie, on n'avait pas des experts en COVID-19, mais on avait des experts en risk communication, en éthique, en anthropologie. And, I had the great pleasure of actually inviting some of the SURE community to participate in our expert panels. And they've been absolutely invaluable. And they've again, shared in real time the results of their surveys on behaviors and so on. And even with vaccines, and we're all very hopeful for that. We had another good news today from yet another vaccine maker, but there are still so many, ethical questions, management questions, and communication questions that surround the vaccination. So I think that your folks are going to be busy for a while as well. And just like many others that perhaps we didn't think can provide any input into the solution of this huge challenge that we're facing. For example, engineers, and for example, physicists, and of course, chemists can always help. Hey, hello, chemists. So
even chemists.
But it's been quite incredible when you see a Nobel Prize winner like Art McDonald that teams up and sort of retools to be able to develop a ventilators and so on, just so that we have what we need in Canada. It's absolutely incredible, and this is, I think, how you realize very concretely that you need multidisciplinarity for these complex problems. And so the science, natural scientists, and the engineers have been an integral part of this response. I've had mathematicians, imagine that, on our expert panels. And they've been just so valuable. I don't think that we've so much talked about mathematics and modeling as we have in the past 6-7 months. So we have another mathematician with us, Alejandro Adam, the newly minted, or not so newly anymore, still, president of the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council. And Alejandro, over to you to give us your perspective on this COVID pandemic.
Merci Mona, c'est un plaisir d'être ici avec mes collègues du Comité de coordination de la recherche au Canada. Addressing grand challenges like this pandemic indeed requires the participation of all disciplines. The natural sciences and engineering have been foundational to understanding and addressing all the aspects of COVID-19, all the way from mathematical modeling of the spread of the virus to the development of new technologies for use in the clinic. I wanted to share with you some examples so that the audience gets some idea of what's been going on. A University of Waterloo team is developing a palm-sized point-of-care device for rapid COVID-19 diagnosis that draws on expertise in engineering, nanotechnology, viral immunology, and clinical medicine. À l'École polytechnique de Montréal, une équipe de recherche aide au développement, la fabrication et les tests des boîtes de protection contre les aérosols pour protéger le personnel médical contre le COVID-19 pendant les procédures d'intubation. At the University of Alberta, a multidisciplinary group with links to health, law, and psychology is examining the proliferation of pandemic-related misinformation as a means of developing effective public education campaigns. And at the University of British Columbia, computer scientists, immunologists, and microbiologists are collaborating to develop artificial intelligence-based imaging platforms to evaluate changes in the molecular structure of virally infected cells. That is why NSERC saw it appropriate and important to react quickly to provide funding opportunities to address the pandemic. First, we contributed to the COVID-19 Rapid Research Response Fund in coordination with the other agencies and under the leadership of CIHR. We leveraged our existing programs to mobilize natural science and engineering researchers in response to the pandemic, in particular through the Alliance Program and the College and Community Innovation Program, to accelerate the application of academic research and expertise in the private, public, and nonprofit sectors. So this branch of NSERC is focused on providing solutions to problems which arise from industry, from society, and they sprung into action very quickly in a matter of 2 or 3 months. More recently, we launched the new Emerging Infectious Diseases Modeling Initiative with the Public Health Agency of Canada to create multidisciplinary networks of experts across Canada. And that's where I believe our friends the mathematicians and statisticians will be involved. It was equally important to support the continuity of all other areas of research during this crisis. So not everyone is going to be working on COVID-19, and we have to support people across the board. That is why we provided funding extensions for discovery grant holders, extended a number of scholarships and fellowships, and are moving towards virtual peer review for the 2021 discovery competition. So adapting and supporting through this pandemic is very important. To help address some of the cybersecurity concerns facing researchers working on COVID-19, the granting agencies also collaborated with universities and with ICED, Public Safety Canada, and other government departments to develop new guidelines. These were published in September via the Safeguarding Your Research portal. Now, what are the lessons we've learned out of this? Looking ahead, it has become clear that the pandemic has exacerbated situations of inequity for many underrepresented groups, in particular for women in STEM. This is a key consideration as we move forward with the next peer review competitions. And we are engaging our new network of NSERC leaders representing diverse researchers and institutions from across Canada for advice on this important topic. Beyond established researchers, the COVID-19 pandemic could cause additional strain on the advancement of underrepresented groups who are already challenged by a constrained pipeline of talent in STEM. So these are issues which must be addressed. Il est également important de continuer à promouvoir la science auprès de la prochaine génération, aussi largement que possible. Par exemple, à cause de COVID-19, le CRCC a collaboré avec Parlons Science, Let's Talk Science, pour livrer 8000 trousses aux communautés autochtones dans le cadre de la Semaine de la culture scientifique et l'Odyssée des sciences. Finally, the pandemic has provided a stark reminder that we must not only support basic research, but also help ensure that Canadians can access and understand the results. Open science and science literacy go hand in hand, and it's not a stretch to suggest that the ability to make sense of the surge of pandemic information and misinformation has been for some a matter of life or death. As we think about what it means to build back better, one takeaway seems obvious. Let's leverage this massive science lesson to foster a broad-based culture of science and society that acts on evidence and rejects misinformation. If one legacy of COVID-19 is a nation where people feel better informed and more capable of grasping scientific issues, we'll be in a stronger position to thrive in the post-pandemic world.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much, Alejandro, for these inspiring and ambitious words, I guess, for all of us in terms of the challenges that still lie ahead. And I'm really pleased to hear you talk about open science and the commitment to the new generation. We'll probably exchange more about them. So, the three granting council have done I think, a magnificent job of supporting researchers, whether they're working on COVID or not working on COVID. But and many of the researchers who were not working on COVID, again, because it just didn't exist or weren't working on viruses, have pivoted and really done whatever they can to contribute to advancing knowledge. In all this, whether we're talking about social science, databases, whether we're talking about experimentation in labs, about collection of virus samples, whether we're talking about virology and immunology and the needs for so much infrastructure. I think that this has both created an awareness of how important research infrastructure is, but also challenges on the infrastructure. And perhaps, I'd like to turn it over now to Rosanne O'Reilly-Ronti, the president of the Canada Foundation for Innovation, to give us her perspective on what her agency's, pressures, have been, and how she sees also the furthering of research infrastructure to advance both pandemic preparedness and research excellence in general. So over to you, Rosanne.
Merci beaucoup, Mona, et merci de cette bonne introduction, car nous, on est assez petits en comparaison avec les trois conseils, mais on se considère vraiment l'organisation de base, puisque la recherche ne se fera pas sans l'infrastructure, et on est l'endroit qui assemble tout le monde et qui peut venir ensemble, les chercheurs, les idées, pour changer le monde. Et je vais diviser ce que je vais dire en trois parties. D'abord, ce qu'on a fait en dépit de la pandémie, ce qu'on a fait à cause de la pandémie, et ce qu'on va faire grâce à ce qu'on a appris au cours de la pandémie. So when a crisis strikes, you have to think about why you're there. And we're there to support the research infrastructure forever. And we had just received all the applications for the big Innovation Fund competition. We haven't had an Innovation Fund competition for 3 years. Researchers were really needing support. Institutions needed it as well. And so we said, despite the pandemic, we're going to do this whole thing virtually. We brought together 350 some experts from around the world, from 23 different countries, in 92 expert panels, and did all of the work, keeping the quality, keeping our eyes on excellence, and we did it on time, and we delivered it to our board on time. And tomorrow, when the board meets, they will consider giving out $400 million to 102 projects across the country that are super, they're excellent. And it's what we need, because we need not only to live through this pandemic, but we need to think about the future. And the future is not just pandemic, it's our science, it's our innovation for all subjects across the country. So we kept it going. We kept our GEL fund going on time. The only thing that we let have a delay in their deadline was the college infrastructure fund, because the colleges needed some extra time. So all of that's been done. Then you think, well, what are we going to do because we're in a pandemic? And the first thing that we did was sign the Leiden Agreement so that there would be open science by everything the CFI funded, anything related to COVID, open science. The second thing we did was take technical staff that we had in any CFI funded operation and say to them, you can go work on COVID and we will continue the salaries as if nothing happened. And then we said, research infrastructure is something that takes a while to create. You can't build a lab in 2 days, and you can't get equipment really quickly. But still, despite that, there are some things that researchers are going to need to do and have right away. And what could we give them that would help them? And so we asked the government to allow us to spend $27 million and use that money as a non-matching money so that the provinces and the institutions and everybody could use it quickly, right away, and not spend time trying to find matching partners. And we held 2 different competitions, one for universities and hospitals, one for colleges, CEGEP, and polytechnics. And we gave out funds that were related to cardiovascular, pulmonary effects of COVID-19, to the creation of data banks so that we could work with across the country. We've worked on some of the research projects included coatings for surfaces in public washrooms and airplanes. The inks that one uses, one of the community colleges has developed ink that will not carry the virus. So, and that's important because there are things that are covered with ink. So we did what we could to support work during the virus. And then we think, well, what did we learn in the virus, in the pandemic, and what can we do for the future? And so what we learned was that we have some really good centers and laboratories across the country, that we have incredible researchers who are sharing and working together, and we have a great knowledge base. But we also learned that there were things that are missing that are going to have to come together. And I'd like to thank Mona Nemmer, who helped me develop a questionnaire. And I thank a lot of other people, including Michael Strong, a lot of people with contact with laboratories. So we actually have done a survey of all the labs to find out what it is they're going to need if there were ever a pandemic or a similar problem. And so 77 laboratories in universities and colleges answered the survey, and that will be available very soon. But it will enable us to create a better network and to create a better basis so that we are solidly ready to support research in the event of another pandemic. We learned that the keys to success were the knowledge and expertise of the researchers. The people were wonderful. And I thank the 3 councils, because you're the ones that support the people and the researchers. So thank you for that. And it was their dedication and caring that allowed us to carry on. There were researchers working 24 hours a day, not for a long period of time, but sometimes 24 hours a day. And then, of course, we know that there was the equipment that was required. Some labs were repurposed, and I give an example of a lab at Simon Fraser University that completely turned what it was doing around to enable it to work on COVID. Mona mentioned the fact that there are physicists that repurposed themselves to become engineers and work on ventilators. There was sharing. Dalhousie University sent cages, and they even sent professors to Saskatchewan to work on the virus. I also remember a Friday night when we all got a call from, well, maybe you all didn't, but being infrastructure, we did, a call from the deputy minister asking us to locate every 3D printer in the country and make it disposable, make it able to work on masks. And I thank every institution in the country, even libraries, people volunteering to help. And then there is the question of the pre-planning. And we can see that happening already. And that pre-planning comes from bringing people in labs together. And you see right now artificial intelligence working with tracing and tracking the virus. We see crossing from fields, whether it's medicine and engineering, social sciences and humanities, and engineering and medicine. I think that the planning that we have happening right now is going across disciplines, and it's really a convergence of fields. And when the CFI did its strategic plan a couple years ago, we said that we wanted to go beyond interdisciplinarity to convergence, which would be when people got together to solve a problem from many different disciplines. Alors, c'est tout le monde qui travaille ensemble. On travaille avec l'appui du gouvernement, avec les autres conseils et aussi le Conseil de recherche nationale. Merci, Roger. Alors, tout le monde travaille ensemble et j'aimerais vraiment passer ce message surtout parce qu'il y a des gens qui, même aujourd'hui, ne savent pas combien on travaille, combien on collabore. Alors, merci, chers collègues.
Merci beaucoup, Rosanne, et thank you for mentioning the mobilization of the labs to to provide actually some of the personal protective equipment that they had, and to locate all these PCR machines and 3D printers, like you said. So another great great thank you to all the organizations, the institutions, the post-secondary institutions, and our research hospitals and institutes as well, health research institutes, for their incredible solidarity in these difficult times. So last but not least is the president of the National Research Council of Canada. And we have Roger Scott Douglas with us, who actually assumed this position not so long ago. But before he did this, and in addition to his duties at the National Research Council, Roger very ably actually managed the vaccine task force that did an incredibly good job at providing recommendations to government on the vaccines that we should be purchasing, on vaccine developments in the country as well. And there were some really intense days where I think I spent more time on Zoom calls with Roger and the colleagues than I spent with my own family. But I had the privilege of seeing Roger in action, and I don't know if you're going to tell us a little bit about that as well, Roger, or what the NRC did during this pandemic, which is just so multifaceted. Of course, the researchers at NRC, contributing themselves, but also through the programs with the industry and all the translation and knowledge mobilization programs, moving things from labs to the market. We really wanted to accelerate this, and I think the NRC has provided much support for this. So over to you, Roger.
Well, thank you very much, Mona. I'm very touched by your kind introduction, and indeed, I'm honored to be here, sharing the stage with my esteemed colleagues. You well described the National Research Council of Canada. We stand at kind of the intersection of industry, academia, and government. And in terms of our research response to the COVID-19 pandemic, I thought I'd touch a little bit on like what we do ourselves and what we do with others, and in some small way what we fund others to do. And in that regard, I guess we're a little more like what you've heard from Mike and Ted and Alejandro and Roseanne in their presentations so far. I mean, since March, like all the other organizations that have spoken, the NRC pivoted, a significant amount of its resources and capabilities to support Canada's COVID-19 response, including on the research front. L'engagement de CNRC touche trois grands secteurs, je dirais. Protéger nos employés, certains membres, et premièrement, protéger la santé des Canadiens, évidemment, et finalement appuyer nos clients et nos partenaires. Et je vais juste toucher brièvement sur les trois. In regards to protecting our employees and ensuring their safety and well-being, like others, the majority of our employees moved, and as many in the audience, no doubt, in university settings and other lab settings will know, this is a hugely challenging task. We initially had about 80% of our employees working off-site, and it's more like about 60 now, as the responsibilities to respond to COVID increased. And in that regard, special efforts obviously made to a safe and secure on-site workforce, and we kind of limited ourselves there to protecting the integrity of critical NRC facilities and infrastructure at our 22 sites across the country. And obviously a number of our researchers, I would probably venture a guess in the kind of third, probably, working in one way or another on research directly related to pandemic response. And then very importantly, providing clients who are responding to COVID-19 crisis with access to our labs, and then supporting a little bit indirectly, I guess, but nonetheless importantly, clients that provide critical service or government declared essential services like telecom, transport, food production, and so forth. So very important work in that regard, bringing people back into our labs to do that work. In the second broad category I was going to speak about is protecting the health of Canadians, and there, of course, we're doing all that we can, and I'm very proud to say, working very hand in glove, very closely with the Public Health Agency of Canada, with Health Canada, with Innovation, Science, Economic Development, and of course with the granting councils that are on the panel with me today. Mona mentioned the COVID-19 vaccine task force, and the NRC is very honored in June to ask to host that. Le groupe de travail sur le vaccin contre la COVID-19 est composé des experts multidisciplinaires, comme Ted a mentionné, et des chefs de file de l'industrie. Ces membres apportent une connaissance inestimable au titre de bénévole pour aider le gouvernement du Canada à prendre des décisions judicieuses fondées sur des données probantes afin de protéger la santé et la sécurité des Canadiens et Canadiennes durant la pandémie. More specifically, we've got kind of, broad bands of work in prioritizing Canadian vaccine projects that are seeking support for research and clinical trials, a little bit upstream for what Mike was talking about in his presentation, attracting wherever we can, and this has been a huge focus, promising international vaccine candidates through advanced purchase agreements and advising ministers on that regard. And then very importantly, perhaps a little bit relative to the immediate response, but more long-term, facilitating solutions to manufacture, some of the most promising vaccines in Canada, and identifying opportunities to enhance business connectivity as part of rebuilding and reinvigorating the biomanufacturing sector in the country. I might just mention more directly related to the NRC itself. We were very fortunate in having in our human health therapeutics research center, what we call Royalmount in Montreal, kind of a research facility for biomanufacturing. We received $44 million to upgrade that to hopefully get to GMP quality in the very short term, aiming to do so by early next summer. That will allow us to provide the production of vaccine materials for clinical trials, which are a critical early step, but in the long-term process for securing a vaccine, perhaps in a second or third wave of vaccines that are coming along. In the same domain, we've been fortunate to receive $126 million from the government to build a new biologics manufacturing center, addressing a really critical vulnerability in the country. I mean, Mona alluded to the PPE crisis that we faced in it. While it's not so evident and obvious, there's a real massive undercapacity in vaccine production in the country, and we're hoping for our new operation in NRC, right adjacent to Royalmount, to be operational late next summer to help out with domestic vaccine production. And then we're also doing research, and we've got a $15 million pandemic response challenge program that is aimed at accelerating and developing technologies that can protect and treat Canadians affected by COVID. We've got kind of 4 main research pillars, I would say. First is kind of the rapid detection and diagnosis, and we've been looking at advanced methodologies, sampling technologies based on molecular signatures, for example. We've got a big stream on therapeutics and vaccines, obviously, that allowing us to develop biologics, other therapies to counteract disease in the critically ill. We've got a stream of work under the program for digital patient care and pandemic analysis that's been talked about a little bit before, developing low cost, for instance, high precision contactless sensors for widespread patient monitoring, which is so important. And then a kind of large kind of catch-all for enabling adaptive responses, where we're looking at in trying to ensure that we're getting some innovative solutions out to healthcare providers as quickly as possible. And then finally, to close, the third bucket, if I can call it that, of supporting our clients and our collaborators to weather the storm. Depuis avril, le CRCC a pu appuyer un grand nombre de petits et moyennes entreprises en particulier, grâce à un certain nombre d'initiatives et de programmes. Et nous avons aussi la chance d'avoir embauché plus d'étudiants et de nouveaux diplômes dans cette période difficile. I'll just mention a few. One good example of prioritization and flexibility in the way that Roseanne was talking about as essential qualities at this moment was how NRC's IRAP program has pivoted its business and activities to respond to the need of Canadians. And in that context, I might touch on a couple. To begin with, we worked very closely with ICED and their program for Innovative Solutions Canada. And by that, we kind of post these grand challenges seeking near to market solutions from SMEs that require financial support to sort of refine and sell their product or solution to meet a COVID-19 related need, and done some great work in that domain from testing, diagnosis kits, and others. People have talked about respirators and ventilators and so forth. So a lot of work in that regard. Thanks to a $250 million investment, they've created at the NRC an innovation assistance program. A lot of the our future, in these innovative SMEs are kind of pre-revenue and therefore fell outside the scope of the Canadian emergency wage subsidy program. And so the IAP, as we allude to, kind of gets those that were outliers to that big thrust. We've provided 2,200 Canadian firms so far, about 2,400 highly qualified Canadians working in this area. And we've in fact just extended this. The Prime Minister announced an extension of this to our existing recipients last week. It's very important. People have talked about the future. We're also helping develop the next generation of researchers in career and skills development. IRAP's youth employment program has been helping a lot of people who've been unable to find work, get access to SMEs. And indeed, within our own organization, the NRC had funding to hire more postdocs, research assistants. We've got about 60 undergrads, 38 grads, 34 postdocs that we just hired in through COVID. And all of these measures are intended to give young STEM talent opportunities for the longer term, which is so critical. En tout cas, en terminant, nous continuerons de jouer, j'espère, un rôle de leader dans le cadre de la réponse à la pandémie du gouvernement du Canada. Et avec nos collaborateurs, nous avons les moyens d'appuyer les efforts de reprise économique de notre pays. Merci, Mona.
Merci beaucoup, Roger, et merci de parler vraiment des efforts du Canada en termes de, biologics manufacturing and perhaps other therapeutic manufacturing as well, the personal protective equipment we all heard about at the beginning of the pandemic about, shortages for diagnostics. And of course, that's just like so crucial to allow us to detect early on the pandemic. The apps that was developed in Canada as well for contact tracing, it's just like, absolutely incredible. But I think what all this also tells us is we're gonna be needing even more trained young people for the manufacturing facilities, for all these innovations, for moving innovations to market. So I think, there's a very bright, future for everyone that's right now in university and grad school or wherever. So hang in there. Colleague, this has been an incredible overview, and we already have several questions. But before I move to the questions, I would like to ask just like very quick ones, to set the stage as well from several of you. And the first question, maybe I'll direct it at Ted, and it's about the impact of the pandemic on the research enterprise, on institutions, on researchers. I think several people know that in March, just like the NRC, the labs had to close, the universities closed. It went on for several months, and everybody was affected. Many people actually have lost a year, not a few months. Those who were doing field studies or surveys that were stopped and so on. I know that you have, you and the colleagues have been in touch with institutions and, really monitoring the impact. And perhaps you can just like summarize for us a little bit that, and also what the granting councils have done and intend maybe to do for this to alleviate the pressure. You're muted.
Yep, thank you. I can talk a little bit about this, and my colleagues can jump in at will as they wish or during the course of the conversation. But if you think about the effects, overall impacts of COVID-19, there really have been unprecedented disruptions and right across the disciplinary or agency boundaries. Some research has been jeopardized, certainly at a minimum slowed down. If you think about planned meetings, events, travel, certainly all have been disrupted. In the case of our disciplines, in some cases, research subjects just aren't around any longer. They're not available. And in addition, one thing we're hearing about a lot is that new priorities of teaching within the institution and the transition, particularly to online teaching, have left researchers with very little time to do their research, which is something I've been learning about. Aussi, la vie des familles et des ménages a été grandement perturbée par la COVID-19. La pandémie a eu des impacts sur la productivité, en particulier, sur la productivité des chercheurs qui ont des enfants ou d'autres personnes à charge. Some of the research that we're funding is showing now that women in particular are bearing the brunt of changes to our economy, to our school system, to our household because of how jobs and gender roles are organized, as we well know. And this has really only gotten worse since the pandemic. And some of our researchers have concluded that obviously after caring for children, overseeing their schooling, full-time working moms, have been left in some cases with less than 3 hours sleep each day as well. In terms of the agency response, there have been a number of actions that have been taken in concert, working together across the agencies, as researchers will well know. I have a few examples. D'abord, que le CRSH prolonge la période de validité des subventions dans les cas des projets qui sont à leur dernière année. Il rapporte également certaines des dates limites fixées pour la remise des rapports financiers. Et les candidats peuvent désormais mentionner dans leur demande les plans pour éventualités qui sont prévus en lien avec la COVID-19 et les impacts sur leur études et leur carrière. Et toutes les réunions du comité de sélection sont maintenant entièrement virtuelles, and that's true right across the councils. We can talk a little bit about the emergency funds that have been dispersed, obviously, in 2 tranches in April 2020, the 291 million that was destined to support students and student researchers, postdocs, and other research personnel who are directly funded from federal grants. And then later on, the $450 million that was provided as part of the Canada Research Continuity Emergency Fund, which has been administered by SSHRC, but on behalf of the 3 councils to support research costs and lab startup costs. And in these cases, also not just federally funded, but also funded from non-governmental sources. So this has been, I think, in the feedback that I get, at least from institutions, it's been very useful to maintain the rhythm and to account for some of the deficits that occur. And just lastly, around monitoring impacts, this has become very important for us on CRCC. We know that the pandemic is having disproportionate impacts on different groups in society. We have a plan to monitor that on our research community from an EDI and equity, diversity and inclusion perspective as we collect all the self-identification data from applicants and committee members. So we'll be looking to see how underrepresented groups fare in terms of their application rates, award rates, and participation in merit review committees and so forth compared to previous competitions. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. We are also aware of many studies, a number of studies that we're collecting information on that have been funded through our agencies. Just received a data set from a very large study in Europe with 800 Canadian cases responding to questions, specific questions about how the pandemic has affected their work. And through the CRCC, Mike may want to talk about this a bit. We're looking to see how we can help mitigate some of these impacts in the coming weeks and months. So I'll leave it there.
Okay, merci beaucoup. Mike, did you want to say anything or anybody else to this before I ask the next question?
No, I mean, what Ted's really captured there, particularly in the latter half, is, addressed to some of the questions that I'm seeing here on the screen as well coming through with this. This issue, specifically with regards to EDI, diversity and inclusion, is a really important one for us. The literature is showing it very clearly that there are issues here. There are a numerous number of reports that we're now seeing, and our colleagues out in the community are clearly highlighting this. And there has been actually a fair bit of work that's been done in terms of trying to facilitate entry into competitions, whether it be increasing the time duration, giving opportunities for explanations of impact and such. And we're really in a mode right now of a number of interventions have been made, and we're really, as Ted has said, trying to understand what impact those interventions have had to try and course correct some of this, so that as a CRCC going forward, we can be extremely focused on where do we intervene, where do we place resources to try and help. And so this survey that Ted was talking about just recently, the major data published in Frontiers, really starts to look at a lot of that data. So right now we're in a phase of lots has been done. We certainly know that this is a systemic issue, which is going to be more long-standing that we need to deal with. But let's collect our data now and ensure that the next intervention is really focused along those lines. So that's the only thing I would add. Thanks, Mona.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I guess nothing like having the data in front of you, and you know, we have to function by what we preach as well to our governments. I'll get to the. We already have you know, some questions, and including on EDI, and like you said, Mike, there you know, in terms of women participation in STEM. I think there have been over the years just so many studies, and you know, some more granular than others. And the Granting Council in Canada have done, I think, an incredible job at providing, you know, like longer time frame, taking away the year, for example, for family or maternity leave, etc. But evidently, you know, if we just look at what's been happening, and you know, without revealing my age, you know, I can tell you that I've been hearing the same you know, stories and the same data for the past you know, 30 years. And initially it was like, oh, you know, it will take time, of course, because you have more grad students, you know, by the time they get postdoc, etc., you know, it will change the composition and so on. And we're just not seeing it move, you know, as quickly as we were hoping. And certainly, you know, now this pandemic has exacerbated, I mean, everywhere, you know, women in the workforce, of course, but particularly in research and in STEM. So I guess, you know, the question is, are there additional things that, you know, we haven't done yet that we should be thinking about? And it's a question, you know, for everyone, you know. And Mike, I saw that you had your hand raised. If you want to start, I saw Roger nodding, wants to say something, and then Alejandro and whoever else.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mona. I mean, I'll make a couple of very quick points in there, because you're absolutely correct in that. I mean, this is one of those things, but you know, there's kind of two pieces behind all of this, and the one is, you know, application pressure and success rates. And one of the things that we learned, you know, collectively as a group, out of the phase 1 rapid response into the phase 2 rapid response, was we very clearly saw in the phase 1, so that was the early dollars in the February one, that there was a marked underrepresentation of women in that application pool. And when we inquired why and tried to understand what the problem was, it was the incredibly short timeline of turning around an application for individuals who were really taking on, you know, a major responsibility at home, whose careers and lives were being put on hold with all of that. And so a very simple intervention of increasing that time window, but simply by 10 days, equalized those numbers. So one of the points behind it all is that, you know, some of these answers are not particularly complex. They're just listen, hear what the issues are, try and address them. There are more long-standing issues, specifically with regards to the resources being allocated. So it's one thing to say you've got percentages, application pressure matched. It's an entirely different thing to say you've got dollars going out the door matched, because that is not equal. And so that needs to be looked at extremely carefully as well. And I think what the pandemic has done, as you say, has really stripped away the Band-Aids on this. I mean, it is very clear now where the issues are. And if we don't get on top of them and address them now, when else are we going to do it? I mean, it's staring us in the face. So that's why I think you're seeing so much activity across all of the agencies and collectively through CRCC. So I'll stop there.
And I just want to make it clear that it's not that we're faring worse in Canada than the rest of the world. Yeah. So it is a global problem, but you know, surely we can lead the way in terms of solutions, and I'm glad that it's on your radar. So Roger.
Well, I was going to just reinforce, Mona, the point that you've made about how important it is that you know, at a moment of urgency, at a moment where there's an imperative on speed, at a moment where you fall back on well-established reflexes, we simply can't allow ourselves to not make the extra effort to look at all that we're doing through an EDI lens in a pandemic. And for the very simple reason that it's been shown so conclusively that you gain enormous amount in performance from the diversity and bringing all of these voices faced with the extraordinary challenges, with the need for ingenuity, with the call for the creative spirit. We would simply be tying one hand behind our back if we didn't bring in as much diversity and as many women, for instance, and other groups to the problem solving moment. And we have to just sort of take upon ourselves that added responsibility. There's been an unprecedented amount of funding, public funding, put out in the last number of months. It would be tragic if we didn't use that funding as a lever to achieve these broader goals about how we actually do our research, such that we position ourselves for the future in a more inclusive way.
To that?
Pardon, did you say Roseanne?
No, I said Alejandro, but he's
Oh.
still on mute. So Roseanne or Ted, don't want to put anybody on the spot, but if you
Okay.
wish to add
Okay.
anything, please go ahead.
Alejandro can go first.
Well, I just want to say that I completely agree with what has been said here. I think in a crisis like this, all your weaknesses come out, are very apparent. So that's what we're seeing. So it's kind of exposed. And we have, I think, a unique opportunity to try to address these things at the core. One of the issues, of course, in STEM is the dynamics, the population dynamics in terms of people in the disciplines. So that's something which has to be addressed. But if you have a problem that has to be tackled by our researchers, I am sure if it's an open problem and you do things following EDI, you will see represented good and equitable numbers of people from gender, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a matter of how we label and how we disperse things, and somehow we built in certain gates and certain over constraints into the system that makes it much harder to achieve the goals. So now is when we can examine all that and try to map out a plan to address it.
Okay, thank you.
So shall I, we tried to also provide more time, but we're looking at redesigning not just the competition, but also the words and the calls that we have. We're looking at the fact that we saw more women in teams, and are there ways that we can get more diversity through different combinations of factors? And then making a virtue of the virtual, having things, using the technology to makes it possible for people to participate in different ways. But what can we do to make that participation more possible? And so I think we can use technology, and we can look at really examining how we organize our competitions to make them more sensitive and more open.
Ted, would you like to say anything? And then before,
Sure.
go ahead, please.
Yeah, just I don't have a lot to add to my colleagues' comments, but just to point out that equity, diversity, inclusion is a priority of the CRCC and has been, since pretty much since it's been formed. And as I said before, a top priority now is learning more about the differential impacts of the COVID pandemic and applying remedies to those that suit. And that's top of mind right at this moment within CRCC. Other than that, we have EDI plans that cross all of the agencies. We're collecting data we were never collecting before in order to better understand where those are and then to take action. And I guess the best example I could give of where action has been taken, as and I saw some questions in the chat about this, is with the Canada Research Chairs Program, where the EDI action plan has made huge gains just in the last couple of years in terms of representation of the designated groups as CRCs. And the plan is by 2030 to have all CRCs basically looking like Canada, in other words, reflecting population percentages, and we're well on track to that. So we're seized with this as a priority.
Okay, well, thank you. Also, my next question will be around, strategic research versus all research, better known as bottom up versus top down. I'm going to start with you, Alejandro, because many people in the apparently natural sciences and engineering community were nervous about the fact that money was being diverted from maybe not from anywhere, but too much funding and attention to COVID at a time when actually we use the advances in so many other fields non-COVID to help COVID. Apparently, there is an expression that I learned of called COVIDization of research. And the question is also to to Mike on this, and as you saw already a couple of questions in the chat box. I guess how do we find a balance between strategic research, rapid response, and maintaining really excellence, broad excellence in the system, because we don't know what the next emergency is going to be and what the next crisis is going to require. So if you can just speak to that very perhaps rapidly.
Sure.
Yeah, we start with Alejandro.
Yeah, absolutely. So the message I send to researchers is that all of your research matters. Issues like climate change are much greater risks for humanity than COVID-19, believe it or not. So you are working on research which is fundamental for Canada, and the three agencies are prepared to support you as best we can. We had these emergency relief measures that were mentioned. Now, in particular, for us, the Discovery Grant is a part of the basic research, which is sort of key and seminal for all the breakthroughs that you see afterwards in the applications and innovation. And we extended these grants with funding for a year. There were 1,500 people who availed themselves of that opportunity, because the idea here is that folks are not in a condition to write a grant given what has happened with their data, et cetera, et cetera. So that I see as a real support of research across the board and avoiding this COVIDization that you're talking about. Now, in terms of the strategic funding, I agree that that should be part of what we do. We should be able to do more than one thing as funding agencies. And in particular, in natural sciences and engineering, which is much closer perhaps to technologies and direct innovation, we have a suite of programs which come under Alliance, which respond quickly to problems in industry, problem in government. And we were able to use that program to create a COVID-19 focused competition where we had problems that were posed, and the researchers would come and address those problems in real time, in timelines which are necessary when you're facing an emergency or wanting to solve a problem. So I think we can establish platforms that deal with the targeted rapid response, while at the same time supporting and maintaining our steady, firm, and unquestioned support for the basic research.
Okay, thank you. Mike?
Well, thanks. It's a terrific question. And this COVIDization of research is one that I find a fascinating terminology with it. There's a few pieces in that. One of the opportunities that I get is to see the grants that are going out and being funded in the tranche of funds that has been specifically directed towards COVID research, COVID-19 or the SARS-CoV-2 virus for that. And it's receptor kinetics, it's in silico projections, it's population dynamics, it's looking at pharmacology, it's looking at behavioral patterns in terms of responsive populations to the threats that are in place. So it's from fundamental cellular biology all the way through to population and policy influences going into play for it. And yes, it's directed at the COVID-19. Obviously, it has to be at this period of time. But it's hard to imagine that the strengths that will have been built through this epoch of time will not fundamentally increase the skill sets that we have in this country as research. I look at my colleagues who are cancer researchers, or even those of us in RNA biology, and looking at, we're thinking about questions in a light that's different now than we did before. And many of my colleagues are being funded to do the same fundamental research, but with a different focus towards the end on it. So I do find the COVIDization is an important concept, but it's also really important to us because during this time period, I think we're building new strengths as well. The second thing that I wanted to raise on all of that is that it's been, one of the really unique marks, I think, of the whole of government response to this is that this has been directed funding. We have not had to pillage our other competitions to be able to support this. And that's a really important point because people wonder, where did all this money come from? It actually is coming from the whole of government response and the investment. Underneath all of that, we are continuing to deliver everything that we have in hand to make this move forward. So it does keep that highly focused group absolutely is in place, but it also, we've continued to provide that bottom up, let the chaos occur in terms of the science, let the best science come forward. And my very last comment, and I know Mona, you and I have talked about this many times for this, is that we have not lost the concept of excellence in this. Everything is being peer reviewed. Everything is being looked at critically. And everything's being looked at in the mirror as well to say, was that the right investment? What have we missed? Can we do this better going forward on the next time around? So, I think the types of standards that we've set are being maintained and we've broadened the skills in this country. So that's just my $2 million worth.
Well, thank you very much. And Mike, it's really important, to emphasize that the funds that have been provided specifically for COVID research were on top and beyond of the annual budgets of the granting council of, even NRC, IRAP, etc. And, by the way, as a cardiac researcher myself, and you've heard me say this recently, if I were back in the lab,
Oh, yes.
I would want to be looking at, what's going on with the COVID on the cardiovascular system. And I think it's, in many ways, it's providing opportunities for those researchers who want to apply their skills and their, knowledge and expertise to solving the problem. So I think it's, and we've seen the mobilization. It's really excellent. I want to go back also to this strategic thing. I agree that we ought to be able to, maintain absolute excellence everywhere in whatever people want to research in any, discipline. But if at one point we find that, in the country, we have, collective strength in a particular area that can actually, be helpful to innovation, to the economy, to bettering our lives, whether it's through policy making or new products and so on. I think we need to also have the flexibility, to take those ideas, right, to mobilize them for the good of society. And I see that Ted would like to say something on that. Yes?
No, I mean, I totally agree, but I've always thought, even going back to the days when I was in the university, that there has to be a balance, and finding out what that balance is really hard. I've always seen it as a kind of 75, 80-20 split, that we really need to encourage this kind of research from the base, from the bottom up. But on the other hand, we really need to get at a few really critical issues, and we should always reserve funding to be able to do that. It's kind of interesting, and I'll put this out there, but with the New Frontiers in Research Fund, we had long discussions about whether that should be directed research or whether we should allow a more bottom-up approach. And in the end, we opted to do a bottom-up approach, on the premise that we would encourage submission of things that were really out of the box, that hadn't been thought of, or things that would require methodologies that hadn't been used, or collaborations that had never been tried. But we didn't, really impose a top-down filter on that. We still could, and I think that's still part of the discussion, but I really, really think you have to have both, and in good measure.
Roseanne, did you want to say something to this question before we move on to the next topic?
Okay.
Well, I guess, you can say this, coming from the the agency that is actually enabling all these multidisciplinary top-down and bottom-up approaches. So thanks for all this. I guess, you know, that there are a number of questions here that basically, you know, are around the theme, well, what have the CRCC members collectively learned from the pandemic to do better, or in terms of research moving forward, better or different? But I think it's new things we can expect to better advance research efforts, you know, if I read some of the wordings here. So I think this is actually a great question, maybe to have each one of you provide you know, rapid concluding remark before we wrap up. We have 10 minutes to go, so I think that will be a good one to give everybody a chance to do so. And I don't know, maybe we can start with you, Roseanne.
Okay. Well, I think that as we move out of the pandemic, we have to look at making a virtue of virtual. Our big international conference on infrastructure that we planned on having in Ottawa in June will be from Ottawa in June. So we have to use technology to solve our problems. We will emphasize convergence, bringing together teams and making facilities network and work together, both technologically networked, but networked across disciplines, and sharing facilities. We should never let major important things drop. We have to keep building the base that we've been building across the country. It is very important. We have to keep open grants, open competitions, because there will always be innovation. There will always be new ideas. We can't shut the door to that. That must happen. We also have to think that when things are over, what is there and our strengths will exist, and how do we continue supporting our strengths? And then how do we continue building across the country what needs to be built? At the CFI, we've been talking about building in regions and smaller institutions, and working with the other councils and the NRC about how we can continue building strong bases for research. And then when we look at it in the very end, there's something that's not very, very exciting, but you know, it's upgrading what we have and keeping house, and that needs to be done. And I think that one of the big advantages that we've had in this pandemic is people in the country have realized the importance of science, and they want to support science and science work. And we have to figure out how we can fan those flames of support. And how do we involve citizen scientists? How do we make our graduate students and our students become spokespersons to the next generation after them? Because that is the way we will succeed in persuading governments that the very best investment that can be made across this country is in research. It will not only drive economic benefits, it will not only help solve problems of health and the environment, but it will make us a better society.
Thank you so much. So I'll just go in the order I'm seeing people. So Roger, you're next.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It was inspiring listening to Roseanne. I mean, I really do feel it's been science's moment, Mona, colleagues. And I sure, like all of you, I think I feel a certain weight that comes with that, because it will only be effective if we have the required trust that goes with that responsibility of science's moment. We need to gain that trust through openness and transparency in all that we do. I think it is a moment for open science. I think it requires us to be honest. It requires us to be honest about the risks that we're facing right now, the extraordinary and exceptional risks that that are before us. And I think that kind of honesty is needed. In terms of working, what we've learned is that we need to work in a collaborative and flexible way. We've had to, all of us, adapt our programs and activities to address these extraordinary and unplanned for things. We need to pivot quickly, and do so in concert with each other, which means a kind of responsive governance, I think, that's required. Most importantly, and I think several of us have touched on it in different ways, to unleash and empower our extraordinary researchers, but driven by a clear and ambitious mission, a kind of challenge-driven collaboration at this moment, matching the very best capabilities from government, from academia, and for business. C'est le besoin d'établir des partenariats divers qui déterminent ces nouveaux modèles, et ce sont les mécanismes existants qui servent à faciliter l'engagement dans ces partenaires à géométrie variable, je dirais. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. J'aime beaucoup l'idée de la géométrie variable parce que c'est quand même de la géométrie, mais si tout est pareil, ben, ce serait assez boring. Merci. Alejandro, I see you next on my screen, and then Ted, and then Mike, so that you guys know which order.
Sure. Thank you. So indeed, I think what we've learned is that having agile and responsive research councils that work together and talk a lot and collaborate is a key thing. And being able to mobilize the funds quickly and to shift priorities, I think, is important, right? And I think we've proved that we all work quite well together. That doesn't mean that every council is doing exactly the same thing, but we can give strong and broad coverage to the whole ecosystem. Data, better data sharing, creation of better data. I think that's a key weakness that we have seen that has to be reinforced. I know there's a whole plan for data management and how, there's always a struggle between the need for clean data and privacy. But I think in issues of the pandemic, that's a key issue that I think we should build on what we've learned going forward. The EDI impacts, what we've learned. So we knew that we had a problem with EDI and we've been working on it. And it just makes clear that there are issues there. So we have to continue on that work and just double down, and that'll take us hopefully to lessons learned from the pandemic. Greater science literacy. The great foundation of everything is the taxpayer, and the taxpayer has to believe in science. So science has to deliver. That means it has to make a difference when it comes to a pandemic, but also in terms of economic well-being, the well-being of a nation. So we have to learn that value that we have, that we bring to the general population. And I also want to mention, Mona, that your role coordinating a lot of what has been going on. I've attended some of your committees on the modeling of math and kind of stitching all these things together. Somehow you know what these different tables are doing. I think the Chief Science Advisor has played a key role in helping to coordinate the whole effort and certainly explain to government what we're doing.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And now Ted.
Okay, merci madame. J'ai 3 points, 2 minutes. Je pense que d'abord, les agences ont développé beaucoup leur capacité de travailler ensemble pour livrer les nouveaux programmes. I think that's been demonstrated, and I think it's something we can certainly take pride in and we can do better and more of in future. Secondly, interdisciplinary research and its importance, I think, has certainly been amply demonstrated in this pandemic, and it's only growing. And I hope people will take note of the projects that will be announced over the next few months and the projects that will be coming out of the New Frontiers in Research Fund, because I think you will be truly amazed as we've been looking at some of that early data. And then lastly, I think it's been super important for us to recognize the different realities of members of different groups in our research community in general, particularly the impact of the pandemic on them, not only to recognize that, but to develop mechanisms then that can start to deal with some of that. So I think those are 3 of the biggest takeaways for me. Merci.
Merci, Ted. Mike, in a minute and a half to leave me half a minute.
Okay, I will do. Thank you, Mona. Listen, I'm not going to recapitulate everything that's been said beforehand. There's just one or two quick points in here. I think I look around this table and the vast majority, like all of us, come out of academic backgrounds and would certainly for myself would have had a very specific perception of the intramural versus extramural programs within the government. So the tri-agencies plus CSI, CFI, and then what NRC and PHAC and such. And I think if there's one foundational piece that must come out of all of this, is that the interrelationship between those intramural and extramural programs has been striking. And the understanding of what each delivers and capacity and how we're going to move our way through this pandemic by working as a collective is really striking to me. It's completely changed how I think about this relationship for it. And I think that has to be one of the legacies going forward, coming out of this. So I think I'll hold it there because everything else I had has been already said. How's that, Mona? 30 seconds left?
This is great. Thank you so much, Mike. And you know what? Like as you were speaking, I wrote down here one science. So just like we think of health as one health, I think that, one science for the entire country. Each sector has, their contribution. We should not be doing the same thing everywhere. It's the sum of it all that's going to be incredibly important. So this has been, really fascinating. I just want to take the 30 seconds I have left to maybe answer also some of the questions that were asked or some of the preoccupation in terms, of research funding going forward, etc. I will only say this, that rebuilding better, and we heard the government say this in the throne speech, and any government is gonna want to rebuild, and rebuilding better means that you need discovery, that you need research, that you need innovation. So I think that we're gonna need more and not less, and I'm certain that governments see this and realize it very well. I think this pandemic, has made us talk about science like never before, has sensitized the entire country to the need for research, to the need actually for facilitating discovery, to innovation. We talk among ourselves about valleys of death. I think that now the valley of death have been exposed. So I think that moving forward, we're gonna do better there. And last but not least, the open science. Many of you have mentioned it, and I want to reassure the colleagues who have asked questions. Open science is one of the agenda, the priority for CRCC was for this year before the pandemic, got a little bit derailed because of the pandemic. But I think another one of the positives maybe of this pandemic is making everybody realize the importance and virtue of open science. And I want to again, recognize the efforts that all the granting councils have done for encouraging open science and abiding by the international, movement of open science. So look, time has flown so quickly. This has been one of the best CRCC meeting. Maybe we should have them, in Zoom. And next time, thanks for the CSPC that has allowed this. I hope that we did not disappoint our colleagues. And again, good evening, good night, good afternoon, everyone. And to the researchers, just stay in touch with us. You know where to reach us. So thank you. Au revoir.
Okay, merci,
Mona.
Bonsoir. Bonsoir.
On behalf of CSPC, thank you to the CRCC for organizing this session. And you certainly did not disappoint. I can tell you this much. There were over 22 participants in audience today. It's clear that this plenary was well received. So thank you, Mona, for moderating, and thank you to all the panelists for sharing your insights during this session. In your chat boxes, you should be able to see links to the survey that will allow you to provide feedback to this session. We look forward to receiving your feedback. Please know that this session was session number 801. That's 801 for your survey feedback. Good night, everyone. It was a pleasure.
Okay.
See you tomorrow for CSPC Day 2. Bye.
Thank you.